They didn't want you to hear this. Not in 1999, not in 2003, not even now. And yet, you're about to hear the voice of a woman who claimed she had seen the other side, who said she had spoken to spirits, who described death not as an end, but as a return. Her name? Sylvia Browne. To the world, she was a best-selling author, a psychic medium, a fraud to some, a prophet to others. To the producers of one national talk show, she was a risk, a liability, a voice that said too much. They invited her. They mic'd her up. They asked the questions, but they didn't expect the answers. The recording you're about to hear was pulled from broadcast just hours before it was set to air. It never made it to television. It never aired on the radio. But somehow, a low-resolution audio copy survived, buried in an old archive, passed between researchers like a myth, a whisper, a ghost on tape. And today, for the first time, you'll hear it. But before we press play, you need to understand who she was, and why her voice was silenced. Sylvia wasn't just another psychic on the airwaves. She had been investigated, interrogated, worshipped, and sued. She made predictions about world events, missing people, even her own death. Some were right, some were wrong. But the ones that hit, the ones that really hit, terrified people. Not because she predicted doom, but because she spoke about death with peace, not fear, not judgment, not fire and brimstone. She said death was beautiful. That's what scared them. In the interview you'll hear, Sylvia speaks with a calm that unnerved the studio crew. She talks about the moment the soul leaves the body, not as a tearing, but as a lifting. She says, "People think dying is pain, but it's the most peaceful moment you'll ever have." She describes how we don't go to heaven or hell. We go home. We chose this life. We wrote the script, and when it's over, we go back to the writer's room. But when she began to explain what she saw, the souls waiting, the voices calling, the tunnel that isn't a tunnel but a vibration, something happened. The lights on set flickered. The producer motioned to cut. The host smiled nervously, and Sylvia said one sentence that never made it to air. "The people who control the world fear what we remember when we die." That was it. The interview stopped. The audio you'll hear later was salvaged, rough, distorted, but real. And now, 2 decades later, people are finally ready to hear it. But I warn you, this is not for entertainment. This is not a ghost story. This is a mirror. Because what Sylvia says may not just be about death, it may be about you. You, who have felt the numbness creeping in. You who wake up tired, fall asleep afraid. You who wonder if there's more than just this cycle of noise, screens, bills, and silence. Sylvia believed there was. She believed that before we are born, we choose who we'll become. That life is not a punishment, but a performance. That we forget, on purpose. And that when we die, we wake up. Just like that. She calls it the Great Return. The moment the actor walks off stage, the dreamer opens their eyes. And in this banned interview, she says, "Dying is like waking up. And when you wake, you remember that it was all you. All along." They told her to stop. They cut her mic. They never aired the episode. But now, as her voice echoes back through this forbidden tape, you'll hear what they didn't want you to hear. You may not agree, you may not believe, but if you've ever stared into the dark and felt watched, if you've ever dreamed of someone long gone and felt their hand, if you've ever asked silently, "Are you there?" and gotten goosebumps, then maybe, just maybe, you're already listening. Now, take a breath, because what comes next might wake you up. The interview begins not with a question, but with silence. Then, a hum, and Sylvia's voice. "I've died before," she says plainly. The host hesitates. You mean, you had a near-death experience? Sylvia nods. I left. I saw it. And I came back. The room stiffens. One of the cameramen coughs. Someone behind the glass taps their pen. But Sylvia is unmoved. We think life is this straight line, she continues. Birth on one end, death on the other. But it's not a line. It's a circle. A spiral. And sometimes, we step off it. She describes the moment she died. Not in a hospital, not during surgery, but during a meditation in her 20s. A rupture. A pulling. Not pain, but release. It was like falling upwards. She says she watched her body from above. Watched herself breathing, unmoving, and felt nothing but calm. I didn't want to go back. I saw my guides. I heard my name. The real one, not Sylvia. And they said, not yet. At this point in the recording, the host tries to steer the conversation back. Let's talk about something lighter. How about your books? But Sylvia refuses the detour. Number. Let's talk about why people are so afraid. And then she drops the first thread of what would become her most dangerous idea. People think death is something ahead, but most of them are already dead. They walk, they work, they earn, but they don't feel. They don't love. They don't wonder. There's a rustle of discomfort in the background. The host shifts in her chair, but Sylvia leans in closer to the microphone. Real death isn't the end of your heartbeat. It's the end of your curiosity. The moment you stop asking, why am I here? That's when you've died. The screen behind her glitches briefly. She describes what she saw beyond the veil. Not pearly gates, not fire and brimstone. A great library, a hall of mirrors, a place of remembering. You walk through a kind of mist, she says, and on the other side, everything makes sense. Every person you loved, every pain you felt, every strange coincidence, it all locks into place. She calls it the between, a space between lifetimes, between stories, between selves. And she says, we've all been there. You've been here before, she says, looking directly into the camera. And you'll come back again. At this moment, the producer gives the host a signal. A small red light flashes on the desk. The message is clear. Move on. But the host, visibly unnerved, asks one final question. Do we choose this life? Sylvia doesn't blink. Yes, she says. We write it. Every scene, every heartbreak, every miracle. Before we come, we sit with our guides and ask, what do I want to learn this time? And then we forget. On purpose. The audience is silent. Not because they're bored, but because something inside them remembers. Sylvia's voice softens. Your pain wasn't random. Your losses were not punishment. They were pages in a book you wrote yourself. And every time you asked, why is this happening to me? The real question was, why did I choose this? There's a heaviness in the air now. Not grief, not fear, but recognition. She says the veil between worlds is thinner than we think. That we brush against it in dreams, déjà vu, in the feeling someone is behind you when no one is there. Death isn't a door, she says. It's a mirror. And when you pass through it, you don't go anywhere new. You go home. Then she tells the story of a man who had died for 5 minutes. Came back in tears. Not because he saw heaven, but because he saw himself. Every version of himself at once. He said, I saw the me I could have been. The me I was afraid to become. And the me I still might be, if I remember. That word again. Remember. Sylvia says we are not here to become something new. We are here to remember who we've always been. You are not your job. You are not your trauma. You are not even your body. You are light, and light cannot die. At that moment, The lights in the studio go out for a second. The recording cracks, and the segment cuts early. Later, when asked why the interview was never broadcast, the network said it had been too disorienting for daytime audiences. But that wasn't the truth. The truth is, some voices speak too close to the soul, and when they do, we silence them. The screen fades back in, no music, just Sylvia's voice. I've met people who died before they ever stopped breathing. She pauses. They died the moment they gave up wonder, the moment they let fear become their compass. She says the world is full of the walking dead, people who follow scripts written by someone else, who play roles they never auditioned for. You think you're a person, she says, but you're a performance. She leans forward, closer to the microphone. You were taught to answer to a name, to follow rules, to want what others want. And somewhere along the line, you forgot who you were before the story began. She calls this the false self, the you made of memories, of traumas, of expectations, a costume stitched together by family, society, survival. And when that costume gets too tight, your soul starts to suffocate. She tells the story of a woman who came to her in a session, terrified of death. But it wasn't death she feared. It was meaninglessness. She said, "I've lived for 60 years, and I don't know who I am." Sylvia said nothing. She just asked, "What would happen if you stopped trying to be someone?" The woman cried for an hour. That was her awakening, Sylvia says. Not a light, not an angel, just honesty. She speaks of ego death, not as a dramatic spiritual event, but as the quiet crumbling of everything false. It's the moment when you no longer care what people think, when you stop needing to be understood, when silence becomes your friend. She describes her own experience, how during one of her near-death episodes, she was stripped of every label. I wasn't Sylvia, I wasn't a psychic, I wasn't even a woman. I was just awareness, watching, remembering. She says at first, it was terrifying. Because the ego screams when it dies. It says, if I'm not this, then what am I? But that scream is the doorway. Then comes the peace. Because when the mask falls off, you realize you were never just the actor. You were the screen the movie played on, the audience, the director. She smiles. You were all of it, and none of it. The host is silent now. She doesn't interrupt. Not because she agrees, but because she's starting to feel something. The producer leans forward again, clearly anxious. The red light flashes once more. Sylvia sees it, but she ignores it. Why are we afraid of death? She asks. Because we're afraid to lose the lead actor in our play. She shrugs. But what if the actor was just a role? A single costume, for a single scene? She says this lifetime is one page in a library of selves, one perspective in the prism of consciousness. You've died before, she says. Not just once, dozens, hundreds of times. And you'll die again. But she adds, death is not the enemy, it's the rehearsal. The host finally finds her voice. But why choose pain? She asks. Why write such hard stories? Sylvia doesn't flinch. Because joy without pain is hollow. Light without darkness is invisible. Love without loss is forgettable. She says we don't come to Earth to be happy. We come to remember. And sometimes, remembering hurts. She speaks about suffering as a sacred tool. Not punishment, not karma, but reminder. Every heartbreak is a crack in the armor. Every failure is a falling of masks. Every moment of why me is actually wake up. Then she says something that would later get this segment banned from syndication. You wrote this life. A beat of silence. You chose the family, the struggles, the body, the losses. She says before birth, we sit in what she calls the hall of choosing, and we design the story. You say, I want to learn forgiveness. So you choose betrayal. You say, I want to understand strength. So you choose illness. You say, I want to experience love. So you choose loss. And then you forget, because forgetting is part of the game. She says the universe is not punishing us. It's playing with us. Not cruelly, but lovingly, as a mirror. The universe doesn't punish. It reflects. And when you look into the mirror and see pain, you're seeing where love needs to go. She makes a long pause. Then, almost in a whisper, you wrote this. You chose this. You knew the pain would break you, so it could open you. At this point, she takes out a piece of paper, a worn page, folded at the edges. She holds it gently in both hands. It's a letter, she says. I wrote it before I was born. To myself. And then, with trembling voice, she reads, If you're reading this, you made it. You forgot, as planned. You hurt, as expected. But now, remember, it was never punishment. It was preparation. She folds the page slowly, looks at the camera. You don't need to awaken. You only need to remember how to laugh. The audio crackles. The screen flickers. And just before the tape ends, Sylvia takes one last breath and says, I wasn't meant to be a psychic. I was meant to be a mirror. The final segment begins not with Sylvia's voice, but with silence. Just the sound of old magnetic tape flickering to life. A dim light illuminates her face. She looks older, tired. But her eyes, they glow. There's something they don't tell you about coming back, she says quietly. You don't get to keep the peace. You bring the truth instead. She sits still for a long moment. Then, the truth burns. She says after one of her near-death experiences, she stopped fitting in, couldn't keep pretending. I'd be at a dinner party, and suddenly I'd see everyone as they really were. Souls in disguise, some hiding shame, some hiding brilliance. She smiles. Most people hide both. She began losing friends. Colleagues called her unstable. Networks dropped her shows. She was labeled as too strange, too dark, too much. But I didn't care. Because once you've crossed over, your loyalty isn't to comfort. It's to clarity. She says the greatest act of love isn't healing someone. It's letting them see themselves. And that's when the mirror comes back. Not the glass one, the spiritual one. Every soul you meet is a mirror. Every pain you feel is a message. Every trigger is a teacher. She leans in again, her voice low but urgent. You're not here to fix the world. You're here to remember who you were before the forgetting. And what is the forgetting? It's the moment you started believing you were broken. She explains that every life is a maze, not meant to trap you, but to show you the joy of finding your way back. Back to joy, back to wildness, back to the version of you that knew magic was real. She recounts one of her last public readings. A woman had lost her son. She came begging for closure. Sylvia didn't offer comfort. She didn't say, he's in a better place. Instead, she whispered, he's right here. He never left. He's the breeze that chills your spine. He's the thought that visits before sleep. He's the voice you hear when no one's speaking. The woman broke down. She didn't need me to heal her. She needed me to remind her that death isn't departure. It's a doorway. Sylvia says we all carry the same fear, that we are alone, that we are unloved, that we are unseen. But no one is unseen, she says. We're just asleep. And this life is the alarm clock. She turns her head slightly, looks straight at the camera. If you've made it this far, you're already waking up. Then she does something unexpected. She closes her eyes and begins to pray. Not to a god, not to a name, but to something older, to the flame within every soul, to the spark that endures, to the love that survives forgetting. She opens her eyes again. "I'm not afraid to die," she says softly. "I'm afraid of living a life that was never mine." She urges the audience, "Don't wait for tragedy to make you real. Don't wait for a diagnosis to find your voice. Don't wait for permission to be wild." The static in the audio grows louder. The image begins to fade, but her voice cuts through one last time. "You are not your story. You are the soul watching the story. You are the silence behind the noise. You are the witness behind the name." And then, the screen goes black. Total silence. Until her voice, one last time, barely audible. Dying is like waking up. And when you do, you'll laugh. Because it was always you, playing all the roles. The screen remains black for a long moment. Then, a soft glow, just enough to see the outline of a candle. Its flame trembles, but doesn't fade. Sylvia's voice returns, almost a whisper. "They told me to never share this. That people weren't ready. That truth frightens more than lies." She pauses. "But I believed you were different." The camera doesn't return. Only the candle flickers, and her voice continues, carried like wind through an old hallway. "This was never about death. It was about remembering. The real you is not a body, not a name, not even a voice. You are the one who watches." A brief pause. Then, "And if something inside you stirred while listening, then that part of you is waking up." Now comes the invitation. Not to follow, not to believe, but to remember. Remember what made you wonder as a child. Remember what made you cry without shame. Remember the version of you that danced without needing a reason. She speaks to the soul behind the screen. If you're still here, you never really left. You only forgot. And sometimes remembering takes just one word. Then, directly to the viewer, write it. In the comments, in your journal. Whisper it to your soul. Say, "I remembered." Don't seek more answers. Ask better questions. Then one last line appears, as if typed live. "I remembered." If you did, write it below. Not for us. For someone else, still asleep. Because sometimes, all it takes is one word to wake up a soul.